let people.
Yeah, it's just something using that.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Grandma?
Anywhere in the middle, if you're okay with that.
I'm fine.
No, he won't be here. No.
Okay, I just want to take his seat. All right, so we got the final version of this today. first meal. Not by myself, but you know what it is. I got some nice things to hang up. You know, I mean, I don't know. It's kind of life. This is Casey's room. I got him a picture. Mom bought him a picture for the top of his crib. I don't know.
All right, anybody standing in the back should take a seat.
Okay, so that's one. The other one I think is all pictures.
All right, we're going to go on the record on the state of Wisconsin versus Samantha Jean Krebs. The record should reflect this as Branch 6 for Outagamie County, State of Wisconsin Circuit Court. File number is 2024 CF 921. We're set for sentencing on the case involving State versus Samantha Krebs. We'll have the attorneys state their appearances.
Tempelis and Nick Grody appear on behalf of the state.
Ms. Krebs is appearing in person in custody along with attorney Stephanie Rock. Good morning.
Good morning. All right, procedurally, we're going to start off with some instructions from the court, in particular for those in attendance. This applies not just for the people here in court, but also anybody logged in observing. One of the goals of the court today is to make sure that the hearing is conducted in an efficient way without disruption or interruption. There's serious matters that need to be addressed from both sides, the state and the defense. During the course of their presentations or at any time during this hearing, there should not be any disruptions. Number one, there's a sign on the door indicating that people in the gallery should have their phones off. If you have a phone, you should shut it completely off, not just mute it or put it on vibrate. It needs to be completely off. If you violate the phone rule, either a bailiff who's in the back or one of the deputies will escort you out. So the one warning has just been provided regarding phones and other electronics. During the course of the hearing, the subject matter will be sensitive. And it's reasonable to have an emotional reaction on sensitive topics, such as the one we have in the court today. However, the court cannot have emotional disruptions during the proceedings, whether that's verbal or physical of any type. If you don't believe you can contain your emotions during the course of the hearing, it's best to step out now and find out what happened later on from others that are in attendance. During the course of the matter, the proceedings, the court expects to hear presentations from the state and defense that can include or will likely include statements from people associated with the victim, Mr. Carnot, and maybe even some from people associated with Ms. Krebs. When that's done, the court expects that to be done from a microphone at one of the tables. It's important that anybody addressing the court take their time. If they're going to read a statement, that's okay. Or they can speak directly to the court without reading it. It's appreciated if that person speaks slowly or in deliberate fashion, just so the court reporter can keep up and make an accurate record of the sentencing here today. So at this point, if there's anybody in the back that has a phone on, it needs to be shut off completely. If there's anybody in the back in the gallery that doesn't think he or she can contain that person's emotions, that person should step out now. The time we spent here will likely be in excess of 2, maybe 3 hours. So the court expects to have 1 or 2 breaks during the proceedings. Has the DA's office had a chance to review the pre-sentence report prepared by the Department of Corrections?
Yes.
Is there any edits or corrections?
No.
All right, Attorney Rock, have you and your client had a chance to thoroughly go over the pre-sentence report that's labeled document 404, submitted October 28th of 2025?
Yes, we have.
Any edits or corrections?
On page 10, the very last offense that is listed is a shoplifting offense with the conviction date of 8/3 of 2005. Ms. Krebs has no recollection of that. I was not able to locate that anywhere, and I cross-referenced this with the document that the state had prepared when we were getting ready to argue prior convictions, and I did not see that on there either. So I just wanted to point that out. I'm not sure where that came from. And then on page 11, very similar situation. It's the second to last offense that is listed. It's a shoplifting in Wood County with a conviction date of November 5th, 2003. It's the same scenario for that. Other than that, we have nothing else to note, Your Honor.
Okay, and you and your client are ready to proceed today?
We are.
Is that correct, Ms. Krebs? Yes, the court, before attorneys' arguments, will hear presentations. Does the defense expect to present any statements beyond the written ones that were submitted?
No.
All right, and the state gave notice that there was a number of people that wanted to address the court. Is that still the case, Ms. Tempelis?
It is.
All right.
Your Honor, if I could, with regard to the list that the state submitted, I would just object to the last individual that's listed. I won't state the name for the record at this time, but the initials I can give the court if they want, but it's the last individual. I don't believe that that individual would be a properly identified victim, and would just note that for the record.
All right. Is the last name on that list, Ms. Tempelis, is that somebody who's a blood relative or associated with the victim that would trigger certain rights under Chapter 950 or Marcy's Law?
It's a former teacher of the victim as well as a family friend. So I believe for purposes of 950, she wouldn't fall under that category, but I still believe that she is able to make a statement to the court.
All right, well, we'll wait till the end for that person, and if there's any citation you or Mr. Grody want to look up for me to consider that, the court's still open-minded about that. All right, who's your first presenter?
The court can wait just 1 second. I just want to check. I did consult with our victim witness coordinator. Laura would be the first person that was going to make a statement, then it's family, and it's ending with mom, and mom wants to make the last statement to the court. In my experience and understanding, anybody can make a statement to the court. The written statements that the defense provided include family, friends of the defendant. I don't see this as being any different from that. The only difference is one is written and one is is in person. Certainly if they had people who were here who wanted to make statements to the court, I would think it's appropriate if they wanted to speak on behalf of the defendant to have that person make a statement. So I see this as completely the same as that. I think for the court's ruling and sentencing today, I think the court can take any information in. Anyone's free to write a letter to the court, and I certainly think she would fall into that category.
All right, on an overlapping issue, have you had discussions with the media people about who wants to be identified and not identified?
Yes, we have worked it out with them. I'm comfortable with our conversations.
Okay. All right. The court often gets statements in writing and sometimes verbally at sentencing hearings. I don't think there's a strict limitation on that. It's more of a discretionary situation for each court. So the court's going to allow the person named Laura to present her statement. Whatever weight I decide to put on it may be limited, but the court feels it's important for both the state and the defense to be allowed to present some statements, whether in writing or verbally, from people that may not be blood relatives or be under the definition of a victim under Chapter 950 or the Wisconsin Constitution and Marcy's Law. However, since it's just one person beyond the other four family members, the court in its discretion feels it's appropriate to allow, and the person with the first name Laura can come up.
Okay.
She sit at the table with you. Okay, and she can be at the microphone. And for the record, you're Laura Lindberg, is that correct?
Correct.
All right. And as I said to the group in the back, anybody that speaks, take your time. We're not in a hurry. It is important that the young lady to my right, the court reporter, makes an accurate record of everything that happens today. So being deliberate or at a pace that is easily understood would be appreciated, and you can take your time. So go ahead, Ms. Lindberg.
My name is Laura Lindberg, Lauralindberg. Thank you for the opportunity to share my statement. No one will feel the loss of Joey more than his family. He was a beloved son, grandchild, brother, nephew, cousin, uncle, and his most important role as a father. His true friends are left without his kindness, willingness to help out, and infectious laughter. During her trial, Samantha Krebs attempted to focus on a narrative of the darkest chapter of Joey's life. It was a very brief chapter that was orchestrated by her. It is not an accurate depiction of who Joey was. In a very short time, she took him away from everyone who loved him. As one of his former teachers, I want to share with you what our community lost with Joey's senseless death. We lost an inspirational story to share and help out others. Joey was hardworking and caring. He had an innate ability to see the good in others and want to help them find the light, just like he had. Our community lost a valuable contributor due to Samantha's selfish actions. Samantha Krebs has a long criminal history and has been able to manipulate the system to remain free in our community. Her flippant disregard for the law is evident. She shouldn't have even been living in Appleton when she took Joey away from us. It has been concerning to learn about her constant manipulation of others to get what she wants. I implore you to give her the maximum sentence, not just to honor Joey's legacy, but to prevent future victims. No other family should have to endure this kind of pain. I truly believe that appropriate sentences earlier in her criminal career could have prevented this tragedy. Samantha instead perfected a scheme to appear as a victim, when in reality, she is a conniving criminal. It is time to protect our community from Samantha Krebs by giving her the maximum a sentence allowed.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Lindberg. Who's your next presenter?
I was asked to read a statement from his grandmother who has prepared something for me to say today.
Okay, and that's Mary Carnot?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
I was asked to give my opinion on what the sentence should be for Samantha. I'm trying to do this without anger. My heart pains every day thinking about Joey. Anger builds up in me. They say that time will heal all wounds, and I pray that someday it will. I don't want this feeling of revenge. The Lord says, vengeance is mine, and I believe it should be in his hands, not mine. Given all the evidence presented during the trial, I feel Samantha should not ever be eligible for parole. I feel she should spend the rest of her life in prison. I just want her to know how she tore up our family with so much heartache.
Thank you for that information from Mary Carnot. Go ahead with your next presenter.
The next presenter will be Joey's sister.
Could we possibly give the screens for this?
Say that again?
Could we possibly have the presentation screens for this statement? There's some photos the victim would like to show, as well as some voicemails.
All right, and this is Kayla Vandenbloemer, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead when you're ready.
A victim impact statement. What even is that? That's what went through my head when I first received it in the mail. A victim impact statement is a written or oral account from a crime victim describing how the crime impacted them. In this instance, the crime being first-degree intentional homicide. And what exactly is that definition? First-degree intentional homicide is defined as causing the death of another human being with the intent to kill that person or another. Intended to kill is defined as the defendant, Samantha, must have had the mental purpose to take the life of a human being or been aware that their actions were practically certain to cause death. And that human being whose life was taken from him was my big brother, Joseph John Carnot. You stabbed him in his kitchen, stood over him while he was gasping for air, and then you left him to die. You were too worried about yourself. You intentionally killed my brother. You made threats in the past, and you followed through with your threats. He is gone. What does that mean? That means I no longer have a big brother. I can't call him and talk to him about my day, my life, or parenting. When I am needing some advice from my big brother, I can't pick up the phone and call him. He always had an answer for me and knew just how to make me laugh every time we talked. Unfortunately, I no longer have that. You, Samantha, you took that from me. And with that, I'd like to play a voicemail I have from Joey.
Hey, little sis. Just wanted to give you a call, tell you I love you, and just to give you some encouraging words and, you know, some loving words from me, from the heart. You're an amazing mother. And that boy is he's gonna love you tons, more than you'll ever know. So, I'm sorry if, I woke you up or whatever, you guys are trying to all get to sleep. I don't know. I just wanted to call you and just tell you that stuff, And I owe you a lot because you've always been the best sister anyone could ever ask for. So I love you, but I'll let you go. Have a good night. Bye.
This is Joey, full of love and kind words. He always, always said, I love you. Joey did not deserve to die. This is a picture of Joey and Kason. A loving, happy father holding Kason while he naps. Something you, Samantha, you took from my nephew. He won't ever have his dad to hold him ever again. You took the stand and raised your right hand, sworn to tell the truth and nothing but the truth. But did you? You diagnosed Joey as this manic person. Joey was in my life for 31 years, and manic is a word I would not use to describe him. In fact, he was the complete opposite of that. He was the most selfless, caring person you could ever meet. He had the biggest heart and would do anything for anyone. He was always happy. Joey's laugh was contagious. You couldn't be around him and not laugh. He had such a strong faith and relationship with God. We shared our walk with God stories often. I'd like to play another voicemail I have from him.
Just giving you a call, little sis, seeing what you're up to and how you been. And hopefully your walk is going good with God and your faith is still strong. And I love you lots. And just give me a call whenever you get some time. Okay, bye, sis.
Can we play that one more time, please?
Just giving you a call, little sis, seeing what you're up to and how you been. And hopefully your walk is going good with God and your faith is still strong. And I love you lots. And just give me a call whenever you get some time. Okay, bye, sis.
This is Joey with a strong faith, a caring big brother, checking in on his little sister and making sure to tell me he loves me. And with that, I am certain he is in heaven, living his best life. Joey may have fought a battle with addiction, but he was certainly not crazy or whatever other words you were using to describe or diagnose him with. This is a picture of Joey and Kason. On the day Kason was born. Joey's life was now complete. Nothing else mattered in this world. Joey was now living to be the best father. Kason was his number one. Kason no longer has a dad, and he is often wondering where his dad is. I don't know how to respond to these things. I feel so lost not knowing how to comfort my nephew. Seeing Kason struggling with the loss of his father, and I don't know how to help him. How do I explain this to him? What am I supposed to say? All of his school and sporting events, he won't have his dad there. How am I supposed to comfort him while he's looking in the crowd for his dad? He doesn't have his dad there to tell him everything is going to be okay when he just needs that father figure to lean on. This breaks my heart. I wish I could bring Joey back, but I can't. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Build-A-Bear, but it's a fun place to bring kids to pick out a stuffed animal and stuff it, dress it, and name it. This experience was not like that for us. When it was time for Kason to pick out a heart to stuff his dog with and make a wish, he wished he could talk to his dad again because he is dead. My stomach was just in knots and my heart shattered all over again. This is just one of many uncomfortable situations that happen in public. People start asking questions and expressing their sorrow. It's a feeling of social awkwardness for all parties. This past weekend, my son and Kason were playing pretend, is what Kason would call it. And he was playing pretend that my son's father is dead. Someone killed your dad, and we need to find out who did it. This is what I would call trauma. Trauma that Kason has to live with for the rest of his life because someone, Samantha, murdered his daddy. My 3-year-old asking, "Mommy, why are you sad? Where is Kason's daddy? What is heaven?" How do I explain these things to my 3-year-old? He doesn't understand what's going on. This has had such a negative impact on my mental and physical health. For months, I could not sleep through the night, which affected my day-to-day life. I have been through and continue to go through hours and hours of therapy. Mentally, I now have to live with the trauma of all of this. I will never forget the phone call I received from my mom telling me Joey passed away last night. When I got that call, I was in a balloon store ordering balloons for my son's 2nd birthday party. Planning his birthday parties will never be the same, nor will walking into that balloon store that I go to regularly for planning all our parties. For the longest time, I couldn't pick up a knife, which meant no cooking meals for myself or my son. I barely ate for months, and at home, my son ate food that was quick and easy. Clearly, I was not healthy for quite some time, which also impacted me being a present mother. I struggled to be attentive to all of his needs. This has affected my work life as I am not able to perform my job 100%. I have missed so much work. I am grateful my employer has been understanding with all of this. Triggers and trauma I have to live with for the rest of my life. Saying goodbye to my brother's dead body at the funeral home. His cold, stiff body and long incision along his hairline from his autopsy. This is something I was not prepared for, nor was I prepared for picking out pictures and songs and planning my big brother's funeral. Next, I'd like to play a video of one of the few picture boards I put together. You can see Joey was full of life, happiness, and love in those pictures. This is a picture of the Fox City scanner page that was posted on social media. It reads as follows: 28XX, North Park Drive Lane. Male found with stab wounds. The reporting person thinks he possibly stabbed himself, but they are not sure. He is breathing. 9:57 p.m. CPR started at 10:01 p.m. Seeing this and then living it out through trial and replaying that over and over and over again in my head, wishing I could have somehow, some way just been there to save him and scream for help, for someone to call 911. Every time I hear about a homicide or stabbing on the news or social media, everything just resurfaces. When I hear a Facebook audio call or that ringtone, it's a major trigger for me. My body goes into shock mode, and if I'm in public, I have to somehow pull myself together. Things that I will never be able to erase from my head, like the day my family and I read the criminal complaint, to hearing and seeing things on the news about this case and thinking to myself, I can't believe this is real life. I just kept thinking I need to wake up from this living hellish nightmare. Then sitting through my brother's murder trial and the flashbacks from it. The flashbacks that will never go away. Joy will never walk through the doors at another holiday gathering or be there for Kaysen's celebrations. Pre-trial was on Halloween last year, and hearing those things in that moment will never leave my mind, making future Halloween years never be the same. Thanksgiving is Thursday, and as we sit around our table to eat, we will be missing Joey. Nothing will ever be the same again. Not ever. Where do I fit in my family now? How many brothers do I have? Am I now considered the oldest? Do I say I have a big brother? What do I say to people? These are uncomfortable situations, conversations for me. I'd like to go over Joey before Samantha, and after Samantha. This is a picture of Joey and Kaysen at altitude playing on a Saturday afternoon. Joey was clean cut. He was happy. He was involved with Kaysen. Before Samantha, he was shaved, clean cut. He cared about his appearance. He was very organized, picky. He went to the gym frequently. He ate healthy. He was involved with family and a few close friends. He was going to church. He was involved with Bible studies. He was great and involved father, brother, and son. He enjoyed boating. He was even running. He was active. He enjoyed rollerblading, going for walks, the little things. Next, I'd like to play a video of his apartment when he first moved in.
Kayla, I finally made my first meal, and it is going to be amazing. All by myself, but you know, it is what it is. I got some nice things to hang up. You know, I mean, I don't know, I'm just trying to live life. This is Kaysen's room. I got him a picture. Mom bought him a picture for the top of his crib. It's gonna be beautiful. I don't know, just wanted to give you a heads up on what's going on here. All right, love you, sis.
Joey was so proud. His apartment was clean. There was no clutter. And he made sure to end that with, all right, love you, sis. This is a picture of Joey and my grandma putting up his Christmas tree. He was involved with family. And this Christmas tree is in that same apartment that he was murdered in. He wanted to have a nice Christmas for Kaysen. He cared. Joey's heart was so full. He loved family time. He was involved father. He was an involved, loving father. Kaysen no longer has his father to put his toys together for him. He will never have that one-on-one time again with his dad. You, Samantha, you took that from Kaysen. After he met her, he was using drugs and vaping. He looked dirty. There was clutter everywhere in that apartment, as we all seen from trial. He stopped going to the gym. He cut off family and friends. He stopped going to church. He was not involved in any Bible studies. And towards the end, he didn't even see Kaysen. I saw a picture of him towards the end, and he had a nose piercing in his nose, and like she had, and he had rings on his fingers. That, I didn't even recognize him. I didn't even know who that was. This is a memorial picture. This is a stone from the VA in honor of Joey. It reads as follows: Joseph John Carnot, beloved father, son, brother, National Guard, U.S. Army, August 2008 to November 2010, 2nd Battalion, 127th Infantry, always in our hearts. We all make mistakes in life, and I am a firm believer at giving everyone a second chance, and even a third chance. Samantha has had too many second and third chances. She has had too many opportunities to turn her life around for the better. She is a 40-year-old grown adult and knows right from wrong. She is a cold-hearted manipulator. I strongly believe she should be in prison for the rest of her life without parole. Samantha should never be granted her freedom to go out and kill again.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Vanden Bloomer, and
The next one will be Joey's mom.
she can come up. Okay, and you can take your time. And just for the record, Cheryl, how do you say your last name?
Swaningson.
Okay. All right, go ahead when you're ready.
So the picture on the left is a picture that I saw. It was almost 10 o'clock on July 18th. And I was just getting ready to go to bed. And as I was walking into our bedroom to go to bed, a picture flashed before me, and it was this picture. And I just got a really warm feeling, and it was a happy feeling because I'd been very worried about Joey in the last prior 3 months. He was on a downslide. We weren't in contact anymore, and the downslide just continued when he met Sam. So at this point, we were at no contact, and I would call, and Samantha would never let me talk to Joey. She screened the calls. So I got this warm feeling. Well, then The next day, when I was working, the officers came into Capitol. I had no idea why they were there. And they seemed so serious, and it just concerned me. And my supervisor had asked me if I could take a moment and speak with the officers in the conference room. And I said, sure. And then I just was apprehensive. I walked in there, and then they told me that Joey, they eventually told me that Joey was found in his apartment, deceased, the night before. And all I could do is just have this picture flash in my head again, and all I could say is, my baby, my baby, my baby, my baby. And I know I was taking Joey home in this picture. God blessed me with Joey. And that's why I saw this picture flash in my head, because God was letting me know that he took Joey home. So he took him back home. I took him home from the hospital, and he took him back to peace. Yeah, he got him. This photo is one of my favorites. I took this picture in the winter of 2023. Joey and Kaysen were sledding. Joey was happy, healthy, and so full of life. Kaysen was snuggled close and safe into his daddy on the sled, and they were both so full of joy. Kaysen was the center of Joey's world. His love for his son was overwhelming. Kaysen, his boy. This picture changed when Joey met Sam. Sam controlled all our visits with Joey and Kaysen. She screened his phone calls. She would always say he was sleeping. Joey began to isolate more and more from us. Soon Joey's apartment turned from being cozy, warm, neat, and tidy, the home Joey provided for Kaysen that he was so proud of, turned into a disorganized mess. Little by little, Sam took over his whole life. It was so heartbreaking to see my son, as I knew him, disappear little by little as each month passed by. She filled his apartment with suffocating clutter and strange decor, such as a collection of booze bottles on the top of Joey's kitchen cupboards. Each time we would visit, there would be less and less space to walk and sit, less oxygen to breathe inside that apartment, until Samantha finally sucked all the life out of that space and all the life out of Joey. On July 18th, 2024, because of Sam's violence, Kaysen's life will never be the same. My heart breaks over and over again. Every time he asks me why his daddy had to go to heaven, why can't I talk to my daddy? In July, we were at Build-A-Bear, and part of the process is to fill the stuffed animal with stuffing and also a heart. Then before the heart is placed inside the body of the toy, the children are asked to make a wish. Well, Kason pressed his little hands together to make his wish, and as he prayed, he said, "I wish I could talk to my daddy again." That crushed my heart. My heart breaks for Brittany. She will never have, my heart breaks for Brittany. She will have to take on all Kason's heartache and pain while she is still trying to process her own grief. I am a Christian, and it says in the Bible, we are to pray for our enemies. Samantha, I do pray for you. I pray that you will spend the rest of your life behind bars, regretting what you did to Joey. And even if it takes till your last dying breath, you finally admit to killing my son, my sweet Joseph. And you ask for forgiveness for the cold, heartless act of violence you inflicted on my son, that God would have mercy on you and you would be saved. It is my duty to use my voice to make sure you stay locked up for the rest of your life. Evidence showed prior to Joey's death, you at least twice made threats to stab him. Evidence also showed that you coldly, callously made a joke about it by saying, "Well, doesn't everybody at some time want to stab their boyfriend?" And then you cackled. Samantha, how dare you make a joke about the deathly, bloody violence you inflicted on my son and our family. I will also pray for myself that God will continue to carry me through the nightmare that never really ends, and continue to pray and say thanks for all of the love and support I have been given from all my family and friends. Something you may not know, Samantha, is that I'm the one who scrubbed the blood from Joey's kitchen floor. Yes, Samantha, the floor where you violently stabbed my beautiful son, Joseph. And for that, dear, oh dear Samantha, I hope you rot behind bars. I have repeated nightmares about that bloody crime scene. It races in my head day and night. Dear, oh dear Samantha, I hope that crime scene haunts you for the rest of your locked up life. As we approached each court hearing, my body would stiffen up. My sleep was interrupted. My body ached, my head pounded, my mind would race, and my emotions flared. Then there was the trial, which was much, much more. It was like labor pains, so intense, so devastating. My stomach was turned inside out. Every bone, every joint in my body hurt. My head was pounding, my chest was heavy, my heart was breaking. My breathing was labored at times. I was so cold. My vision at times was cloudy from crying. The hardest part was swallowing every emotion into a big, tight knot in the pit of my stomach. Emotions could not be showed. The most important thing was to not distract the jurors and the court. That stress made my heart feel like it was going to burst. Kason's feelings will be hurt, and his heart will break over and over again throughout his life. His daddy won't be at any sport practices, church events, birthdays, graduations, holidays, just to name a few. I can picture his sad face, looking out at every crowd where these events take place. Maybe, just maybe, hoping someone out there would resemble or look like his dad. It's such a heavy sadness. His daddy won't be there to tell him everything is going to be okay, or tell him how proud he is of him, or how happy he makes him, or help him with his homework, talk sports with him, or ask advice about friends or girlfriends, decorate the Christmas tree with him, hear his daddy sing happy birthday to him, tickle him, giggle him, snuggle him. When we lost Joey, Kaysen and I would look out at the night sky to look for the brightest shining star, which was his daddy. Recently, Kaysen has corrected me on this, and he tells me, Grandma, God is the shining star at night, and Daddy is the sun rising every day. Dear Samantha, what a shame, what a pathetic shame it is because of your cruel, violent action. That's all Kaysen has to remember his daddy. And dear, oh dear, sweet Samantha, what a pathetic shame it is going to be while you spend the rest of your pathetic life behind bars. My wish for you, dear Samantha, is that every day you hear Kaysen's words in your head and every night they haunt you in your dreams. Nightmares haunted me before, during, and after the trial. One of my nightmares is as follows. I see before me an empty, large glass fish tank filled with crisp, clear, blue water. The water in the right corner becomes slightly tainted by black ink. Slowly, the black ink moves to the left and continues to contaminate the beautiful blue water until eventually the black ink takes over the entire color of the water tank. Each time I listen to the 911 call throughout the trial, in my heart and in my mind, my son died over and over again. Each time I heard it, I could pick up more details. The last time I heard it while my sweet Joey laid on the floor, struggling to breathe, dying, abandoned by you, Sam, I heard Joseph's death rattle. My heart shattered. I hope every night of the rest of your sad little life you are restless. I hope you are awakened by the feeling that you are trying to get up because you are in shock and disbelief that you have just been stabbed and that you are choking and struggling to breathe, gasping for air, not knowing if it's the last breath you'll ever take, and have the heartache of all whom you'll leave behind, your child, family, and friends, and to have someone standing over you just watching you struggle, watching you die, and that person is someone you trusted. And for that, dear, dear sweet Samantha, I hope you rot in prison for the rest of your life, for the agonizing pain you have caused for me and my family. Evidence showed Samantha tormented Joey by continuing to use in his apartment. She was cruel beyond words. She showed no consideration for Joey's substance abuse cravings. She played with Joey's mind and emotions. She preyed on Joey's good-natured, generous, gentle, loving heart. Samantha, how dare you torture my son like that? Sam, you continued to isolate Joey from his loving family. Then you manipulated his heart and mind and filled his head with lies. You turned him against us, his loving, loyal family. You filled his house with drugs and replaced us with your so-called good friends, better known as your accomplices, John Pfeffer and Jeff Hayes. Samantha, how dare you tear apart our family like that? Joey struggled with substance abuse at different times in his life, but this time was different. He just couldn't get out from under the control of Sam. She made her final statement to enforce her power and control as she coldly stood over the top of him as he took his final breaths. For this, Samantha, oh dear Samantha, every day, I hope you spend every day of your life in prison in misery. When John Pfeffer wanted to call an ambulance, Sam stated, "Wait," while the last 10 minutes of Joey's life ticked away. Joey will be missed dearly by all who loved him, including his loving family, Kason, Brittany, aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, and the community. Joey loves sports, movies, boating, or bonding over a home-cooked meal. Above all else, Joey's proudest accomplishment. Above all else, Joey's proudest accomplishments were centered around his role as a father. He cherished spending time with his son, Kason. Joey's love for Kason showed no bounds. Joey served in the Army National Guard after attending Kaukauna High School. He was a dedicated employee for Carew Concrete Company. proudly working as a dump truck operator. His faith was a cornerstone of his life, bringing him much comfort and strength throughout life's challenges. His beaming smile, vibrant personality, charisma, energetic spirit, and great sense of humor lit up a room wherever he went. Joey's light shone brightly until his passing on July 18th, 2024. There are some who have a heart and soul that shine so bright that nothing can put it out. Not even you, Samantha. Joey's light will continue to shine in the hearts of all who love him. The only comfort I have is knowing that my son Joseph is now resting peacefully in the arms of our Heavenly Father. Joey is smiling down on all of us from heaven. Shame on you, Samantha, for the living hell and agony you have caused for my family and I.
All right, thank you to Ms. Swanningson. Court will consider the full scope of your statement. This time, we're going to take a break for about 10 to 12 minutes. We'll start up again. My clock is at 10:17 a.m. We'll start up at 10:30 a.m. and proceed. You have one more statement?
I do not.
Okay.
We can take a
The
break.
child's mother was going to address the court or no?
I don't believe so.
Okay, you can double check on that, and then when we come back, if there's no further statements, we'll get into the attorney's arguments.
Thank you.
Okay, we're on break till 10:30. All right, we're back on the record in court. Everybody should be seated. All right, we're back on the record. It's 10:31 a.m. on my clock. And from the prosecution's side, is there any other witnesses or presentations? All right, and from the defense, now that you've had more time to reflect on it, is there any statements beyond your clients?
No.
All right, before we get into the arguments, the court wants to get perspective from the attorneys as to any credit. So if you take a few moments and let me know what credit you think the defendant's entitled to.
I believe it would be July 22nd of '24 to November 24th of '25. The impact would be, she has also been put on a probation hold as she's serving a revocation right now. So if the court runs it consecutive, I believe she would have no credit. If the court would run it concurrent to that, she has been on bond, I believe, since then, or has been in custody on this case since then.
Okay, Ms. Rock?
I do agree with those dates.
Okay, we'll start with the prosecutors with their presentation and argument. Go ahead.
Thank you. In addition to the statements that were already provided, I do want to remind the court that the state did file a victim impact statement earlier. There is a letter from Kaysen's grandfather. There is also a writing from Kaysen in there, and I do want to remind the court that that is in the file and should be taken into consideration as well.
All right, I did read those in the last few days.
Thank you. In addition, there's a restitution summary that was provided. There is restitution in the amount of $7,962.81. There's an additional surcharge on there for a total of $8,769.09. I believe that based upon the statute and case law that those amounts are appropriate for restitution, I'd ask the court to order that. And the court should have the filing as well as all the documentation supporting that.
I have
Okay,
that. Yeah,
all right,
go ahead.
thank you. As we sit here today, we have had a lot of facts for the court to consider. And as we look to today's purpose in sentencing, we're required to look at the Gallion factors that are outlined by our case law and by our statutes for the court to consider sentencing. So while the court can consider the statements of all the individuals who have spoken and provided written documentation, we also need to focus on the defendant's character, on her actions, on her history in order to be able to address what the appropriate outcome is. There's really no good outcome today. A life sentence, no matter if there is an eligibility or no eligibility, is never going to bring Joey back. He is never going to be able to be part of Thursday's Thanksgiving dinner with his family. He's never going to have the opportunities to be the father that Kaysen should have. And there is nothing that this court nor any of us, unfortunately, can do to make that whole. And so when we're looking at what the next step is, it's what is just, what is an appropriate outcome. There's no doubt that Joey struggled with addiction, and he worked hard when he was with Brittany to get clean. Brittany, while she did not make a statement specifically today for sentencing purposes, I think there's a feeling from her that she provided so much about who Joey was and how he lived his life in her testimony that really outlines a lot of what we've also seen from Joey's family. He was a hard worker. He got a good job after he got clean. He did a lot of work to make that happen. He got his own apartment. We were able to see that video. He was so proud of his first dinner there. He was living independently, and he was saving for retirement. And we have information outlined in the pre-sentence investigation about that amount of money that he had that Sam had used. Addiction is hard, and addiction, while at the core of this case in many ways, is not just the only part of the story. Joey found his way through addiction, and he found that he could work through that by getting the support that he needed from the community partners that we have, for the programming that he was able to be part of, and then, most importantly, through the support of family and friends. And I think that that's important to recognize because we know how strong that addiction struggle is, and we know that it takes a lot to be able to get clean. And I want to kind of juxtapose that to the conversation and the opportunities that Samantha has had and the different choices that she has made. But certainly he's responsible for himself, Joey is, and for his choices. And I think everyone here would agree that there were some choices that he made about his use towards the end that weren't good. But his addiction impacted his life and ultimately had a big impact on his death. But more importantly, I want to focus on his relationship with Samantha. Because even with all the addiction issues, there are people in our community that struggle with addiction and never see and experience this kind of violence, never perpetrate this kind of violence. His relationship with Samantha, honestly, at the time that we prosecuted it, she was in the process, or at the time this happened and we charged it out, she was in the process of trying to move to Appleton from Wisconsin Rapids. And you can kind of see that in her residential history. Knowing what I know now, I would have charged this as a domestic homicide because it wasn't clear if she was really living here in Appleton, and I think the transfer was in the process. But aside from whether or not that's a statutory thing or not, or falls into the definition or not, their relationship was clearly one of power and control. And while we often see and talk about that with men, we know that it can also happen with women. And we know that men can also be victims of domestic violence. When we look at protection of the community as one of the galleon factors, we have to look at her prior record, her history of desirable behavior, her personal and social traits, age, education, employment, remorse, and cooperativeness, and then what rehabilitation would look like, because that's what the statute first wants us to focus on. I think it's important to note that while she's 40 today, she would have been 38 at the time she committed this offense. 38 is a grown adult, someone who is responsible for themselves, someone who makes independent decisions for themselves, is someone who needs to be responsible for what they do, how they act, and how they support themselves. Her adult life has been involved in ongoing criminal activity while also having the struggle of addiction. When we look at what's outlined in the PSI, according to her, because it wasn't documented by the agent contacting the school, but according to her, she graduated with honors, took college prep courses, and was involved in extracurricular activities. She didn't have any juvenile history that is outlined in the PSI or that I was aware of. And according to her, by all information, she had a good childhood. This is someone who had the skill set and the smarts and the ability to be able to make different life decisions at many, many different points in time. She has no significant work history, though. She has gone from job to job. She has not had consistent jobs other than selling drugs, which was consistent with what her phone download showed. And she talks about in the PSI that she consistently has sold drugs as maybe a way to either have access or perhaps also just to support herself. But she has no reliable work history when I looked at the PSI. She does not have residential stability. She has moved around a lot. I think sometimes she's in and out of in jail. She's been in and out of prison. She has periods of time that I think maybe she goes back maybe towards her mom's. But she doesn't have any strong stability, work history, or residential history that she's created for herself by age 38. She has a child who she tragically lost as a termination of parental rights. My guess would be that there were a lot of supports and services provided to aid her through that, to help her with residential stability, to help her with getting her addiction issues addressed, helping her make sure that she was working, that she was living a life crime-free. I know from my experience in working with our county services that there is a lot of effort that goes into helping provide services so that we don't end up in that position. And I think that's important to recognize, because when we're looking at ultimately rehabilitation and we're looking at addiction issues, we're going to talk a little bit about what DOC provided, but I think we can't not look at the fact that she had would have had a lot of other access to other programming and support through social services before that would have ever even been able to happen. When we look at her prior record, she appears to have been revoked at least 3 times. In one case, I think it was even twice. Somehow she had gotten a deferred prosecution agreement, which I think might be consistent with when she was involved in the drug treatment court in Wood County. And she had gotten a deferred prosecution agreement on the felony, which she managed to turn into what I believe was a stayed 2 years, 6-month prison sentence that was ultimately revoked, suggesting to me that she then went to prison out of that case that started at a deferred prosecution agreement. I talk about the drug court because I also know that the whole purpose of drug court is to try to address addiction, to try to help people find stability in residence, to help them find stability in work history, to help them try to surround themselves with supportive, clean friends, family members that can help support them through recovery. And so I think outlining that is important to recognize that there have been multiple attempts to address this issue. But yet, when we look at her prior record, I think, and it could be corrected a little bit based upon Attorney Rock's comments about the shoplifting, and maybe those were addressed as ordinances, citations, I don't know. But I had about 20 cases with 37 convictions, somewhere between page 9 and 11. So it's somebody who has had a lot of contacts, regardless of how we look at it, even if it's -2 offenses. A lot of contacts, a lot of convictions, a lot of opportunities in front of the court, a lot of opportunities to be put on probation, a lot of opportunity to be put in drug court, and to be given as many resources as possible through Health and Human Services, through DOC, through treatment court, through sitting before court hearings, and having the opportunity to address them. While on supervision, on page 12, it talks about how there were numerous violations, with many of her violations resulting in new charges and revocations when she was put on supervision. The agent who wrote the PSI said her periods of supervision were, quote, overwhelmingly negative. There were times where She had multiple ATRs to different treatment programs, including the Wood County Drug Court, it seems. In treatment programs, she had to be placed sometimes on house arrest due to socializing with people who were using or not being compliant in different ways. Other periods of house arrest while she was on these ATRs, fake urine analysis that she had provided. In 2016, while she was on supervision, I believe, she was at a house that was largely for the sale of drugs and had a firearm and somehow accidentally discharged it at another. I don't know all the facts surrounding that case other than to say that it's outlined in the PSI and certainly concerning. On page 13, and I should say ultimately she was convicted for that incident, I believe, in Wood County case 16 CF 490, which was an injury by negligent use of a weapon or explosive. On page 13, it outlines in her correctional summary or experience that she had threatened another person who they shared same significant other in some way, shape, or form. And she threatened to stab that individual and her family over an argument that they had. I think that that's important because that's what we see in this case. We see her making threats with weapons. We see her negligently discharging weapons. We see her now having the threats that we heard from the witnesses in this trial where there were previous threats of her stabbing Joey. We hear the phone call of her saying, you know, who doesn't threaten to stab their boyfriend? And we hear those comments, which in light of her history and having that addressed from her threats down previously, knowing that she can't just say things like that, and the threats being considered real and concerning, and having to address that through supervision, to the threats that we have of Joey's life that his coworkers had heard. And then we combine it with the fact of how he died and how she had stabbed him. I think it's really critical to see that increasing level of violence over time. So not only are we having the addiction and drug use issues, which alone are concerning, which alone have significant criminal ramifications, but you're seeing a pattern of violence and threats, use of weapons, and behavior that ultimately in this case has now caused the death of another in an intentional act. So that now has increased our concern over community safety exponentially, not just for romantic partners, but we know that she's made threats and harmed other people previously. In her additional convictions, while largely drug-related, we do have batteries, disorderly conducts, criminal damage to property type cases, and then we had a domestic back in 2004 in Wood County. That was also a domestic battery and disorderly conduct. So I think it's important to kind of connect that domestic piece that we saw early on with this increasing violence over time while she's using. In addition, we look at everything that the community has tried to do to address her drug use issues. And she talks about how she would like to be able to live in the community and be crime-free or not be using. But that kind of leads us to page 22 when it talks about her prior experiences in treatment. And in that kind of leads us into that second prong of the Gallion factors with rehabilitation of the defendant. So we're looking at opportunities that she has had for treatment, what she would need moving forward. And we look at page 22 that says that Krebs has been offered and participated in numerous treatment programs in the community and while she has been incarcerated. This includes Affinity House, Wood County Adult Drug Treatment Court Program, inpatient and outpatient programs from Human Services, In prison, she's participated in cognitive behavioral programming, substance use disorder program, challenge incarceration program, and an earned release program. So we see someone who's basically been offered all the program and services that we have, and yet not is she just continuing to use, but she's continuing to engage in criminal activity and leading to somebody's death. She talks about how she wished she would have taken treatment seriously to live a life free of crime. And we think about how she got released, it says in November of 2021. So 4 years ago, she was released, and how she continued to use and reoffend after that. One would think that at the point in time where she is in the Wisconsin State Prison System, she's receiving services through in custody services, and then ultimately is released to extended supervision, that really would have been the turning point, or the termination of parental rights, the turning points where she would have realized that she really had to address the substance use issue. And I'm not trying to make light of how hard it is to address substance abuse, because I appreciate the fact that it is extremely challenging in our community. But it is also a problem when it continues to lead people into additional actions that lead to additional crimes, and certainly when you have the loss of a life by first-degree intentional homicide. For whatever reason, all the programming that she had really didn't result in a change in behavior, because what we then saw is, even on the day of the homicide, and we had plenty of testimony from her and other information to show from text messages that she was continuing to use that day. Well, Joey was at work. Well, Joey was pending that child custody hearing coming forward. He was trying to do the right things. When we look at what those that day looked like, that morning starts by, "Good morning, my shine bright like a diamond. I would love to make home-cooked meals with you and be partners in the kitchen." And then he talks about, "I know you have a lot going on. It's okay. Just can't wait to say I do." A lot of those messages that we saw during trial are really so interesting when we compare them to the messages that his sister was getting from him. Messages of just reaching out and checking in and showing love and care for someone. And that's what he was doing on that particular day. We think about those other messages that had the picture of him at a construction site, and him saying, "I'm right by the house. Come say hello. What are you up to? Hello, I'm on my way home." So he's messaging her that day, and she's sitting in her house, or in his apartment, using drugs, smoking meth, not working, while he is engaging in this very, what I would consider, thoughtful, caring response. He also then quickly, "Sorry, I think I overreacted. It's all good, no worries." And I start to think about that domestic violence tendency, where somebody does something where she's engaging in this behavior, and then he's quick to respond, "Oh, I'm sorry, I overreacted. It's all good. Don't worry about," trying to kind of smooth over the issues of whatever was happening. And then he sent her a text, "I just don't want to talk about that while you're with Johnny boy." Well, she's there in the living room smoking meth. Then he says, oh, no worries, I ain't gonna touch his stuff, but I was gonna sit down and watch TV or whatever. And then I see a bitch in front of me, where he's talking about how even in his own home, while he tried to create this space, well, he knows that he has this child custody hearing coming up. Well, he cares greatly for Kaysen and wants to have custody, and knows he needs to get clean, because we heard from Brittany about the conversation she had with him when he was able to make a phone call when Samantha wasn't there, and called from his original number, which she thought had been disconnected, according to them, because she was only allowed to talk on Sam's phone number, because that was the number she was given. Again, that power and control tactic. But he reaches out, and he is upset, and he wants to get clean. He wants to be able to get his life back in order, but he struggles because he also loves her. He loves her, but he doesn't want the behavior to continue. And he's saying in here even that he doesn't want that bitch or that meth that was in there. That night, we have an opportunity for him to be able to go see his uncle and cousin. And there were text messages that we talked about that night at 8:42, which was about an hour before he died, that he ended up canceling. It ends up having conversations in text and then a couple quick calls where he was supposed to meet up with one of his uncles and his nephew, and that never really happened. And we hear from the family, and we hear about this isolation that he has. We think she's in the living room smoking the meth. We have the text messages in here about how she says Chong left. He had been there. She was eating a bowl of ice cream, and they're talking about how she's still high, and her answer is, should I not be? Again, even her use surrounding him, and she talks about wanting to be the stepmom, and she talked about wanting to be married to him, and yet things are spiraling out of control for him for sure. She's using significantly. I don't know if one would say her life is spiraling out of control at that point. It seems to be kind of consistent with her use and being home and not doing much. He's trying to put the train back on the tracks. It's not happening because he's also in this relationship that is a really codependent drug use relationship where even when he comes home that night, he had texted her earlier that day about wanting to make food in the kitchen together with her, and some really kind of quote unquote normal relationship behavior. And then he's struggling because he's in his bedroom, according to her, while she's out there smoking meth, and he ends up using that night. Now, was that his choice? Sure, it was his choice. But it's this environmental factor with her that is also continuing to create a lot of issues for him. Then at some point in time in that hour after they start using, there is definitely an argument about something. I think it's interesting because he's at that point, he knows he needs to get a clean urine to have a urine screen done for work. He's struggling probably, and of course I don't know this for sure, but struggling with the fact that he used because he knows he has to get a clean urine in order to be able to pass this work test. There is, according to her, some argument. She claims that they're talking about his son. But based upon her testimony and constantly changing stories, I don't know what happens in those minutes when they're in this argument and what starts the argument, what is said, who is saying what, because I can't believe anything that she says about what those minutes were leading up to it. Based upon her testimony, it would change within sentences of each other. It was so inconsistent that everything that she said was not true. And when we look at that dynamic and we think about how she started to develop her story, she's high. We know that. There has to be some type of anger. She stabs him. And then the response is, there's not blood on the wall. She says she buzzes him in. There should be blood. If she is helping trying to stop that blood, there should be blood all over on her or around her. She says when she testifies that he's gushing blood. Now, that's not really super consistent with what Dr. Kelly says because Dr. Kelly said so much of that blood was in that heart sac, but yet still in the beginning that some blood would certainly be present. But she's talking about it gushing. She talks about trying to let John Pfeffer in. She has him, as soon as he comes in, a guy with as much criminal history as he has, somebody who some might say was a quote-unquote hardened criminal and has had lots of prior law enforcement contacts and times in custody. His first response was the need to call for 911. Now, up to that point, that would have happened within minutes that he would have stabbed. At that point in time, she's not doing anything noticeable. According to Christy, she's standing over him. At some point, Christy takes over. Christy has blood on her when she's rendering aid, some on her clothing and on her hands. And at that point, Samantha's primary concern is her. She would burn the world to save herself. And she starts. And she tells John, whose immediate response with all of that experience he has is, we need to call 911, who is not law enforcement friendly. He doesn't want all of those people there. He doesn't want to have contact, but he knows that that person laying on the floor needs medical help. And she says, no, wait a minute. Now, I think there's a lot of conversation. There was a lot of testimony about what else could have been said. It could have referred to other things. I don't believe that. When I listened to that call and I listened to it, I don't even know how many times. To me, it is very clear that she's saying not to call 911. Because if she wanted 911 called, at some point she'd say, hurry up and call 911. Somebody in that situation is not going to respond by just letting it be, by going through the house and clearing the house of any drug paraphernalia, by getting whatever she needed in order to be able to leave. And we think about that closing argument, and we think about that painful, painful time of listening to that call and sitting and watching that video and waiting for her to turn on Northland. All of those minutes where someone should have called for help. Certainly the person who caused it should have called. Certainly the person who loved him and wanted to marry him and wanted to be a stepmother to his child and wanted a future with him should have called. She could have called and still gotten out of there and gone to Jeff Hayes' apartment. She could have called and just skedaddled. She could have called on her way, but she didn't. The first person she calls is she's calling Jeff Hayes. She's talking to John Pfeffer. She's not actually engaging in anything that would get help to Joey. And that wait and the silence and the clock ticking away while no aid is rendering is her watching the world burn while she leaves to save herself. She put so much effort in to avoiding apprehension. She talked about how, what are we supposed to say? He fell on a knife, then it's suicide. Is she there? Sometimes she says she's there. Sometimes she says she's not there. She can't create the truth because the truth to her is a constantly moving target because she has to create the story. So then we have that call with her when she could have offered up some help. She could have come back when she was talking to Officer Felmer. And again, just the continued, like he was manic, he was acting crazy, he was doing all of these things that essentially muddy up Joey to try to make it about him while she's trying to avoid any apprehension. The hiding, the changes in behaviors we saw at Jeff's apartment on the videos, getting rid of clothes. If they were in the hamper, law enforcement would have found them when they did the search warrant. Those clothes, I don't know when they left that apartment, but they were gone because she didn't want to be connected to them. That apartment, not big. They didn't just disappear on their own, and they certainly weren't in the hamper. The call to Joey's voicemail the next day suggesting he was at work and her saying that, well, I thought maybe he would be at work when she was talking just before in her testimony about how he's gushing blood and he was visibly dying before her. And then this cover up to have this fake text message that she's concerned about him. The covering up of the VIN number to suggest that she didn't know that was happening and that was all Jeff Hayes' independent plan. Or her phone being deleted and going to John Pfeffer and that all of her phone getting erased to cover up what she had been doing, the stickers on her vehicle. She is the one that's commenting to her mom in a phone call about her vehicle not having stickers, so it's not going to be the one that we saw in the video. The calls to her mom are so interesting because her mom is so confused. And you can hear it in there when her mom is continually like trying to keep her eye on the ball and the ball keeps changing because the story keeps changing. Her mom's like, well, I thought that's not, nope, that's what happened. Because she kept trying to cover for herself. When we talk about this, and I know that the court heard all of the testimony, but I think it's important because one of the galleon factors is, does she take accountability? Does she have remorse? That's something the court has to consider. And the reflection of all of this is none of that exists. But it goes on and on. She changed her testimony during, she changed her story during testimony constantly. It was, you would address one thing, you'd go on to the next, and it would contradict what we had just talked about. She has zero accountability. In the PSI, she continues to maintain her innocence. Her actions and statements since the incident have been entirely self-serving. She's consistently making things up on the phone calls. She's consistently making things up in terms of evidence and in terms of facts, in terms of her testimony. It was absolutely incredulous. But then she's dragging others in to help her cover it up. At trial, I know that the defense idea was that these men did whatever they could to help her out. These men were pawns in her game. They are manipulated. She manipulated Joey. She manipulated Jeff Hayes. She manipulated John Pfeffer. She manipulates Greg Allen to get what she wants. And she talked about that. In fact, on cross, or redirect, I think it was asked of her why she was talking to Greg Allen like that in those phone calls. And it was to get money, so that she had access to money. She wanted the best iPhone 15, whatever, that came out last year, that Greg Allen was gonna buy her. Just using him for money. Those sexual conversations that she had on voicemail, whatever she needed to do was what she was gonna do to get what she in fact needed. And that's the same thing we have with Jeff Hayes. Now, they have their own role, they have their own accountability, they can make their own decisions, and they did. But that's resulted in John Pfeffer having sentencing next week for harboring and aiding a felon. It will have consequences for others. It has consequences for her. She will pull whatever she needs from people. She will say whatever she needs to say to people in order to be able to get what she needs. She isn't an 18-year-old naive person. She is an experienced individual. She at that time was a 38-year-old woman. She was independent. She had tons of contact with law enforcement and with the criminal justice system. She was not naive to this process at all, and she didn't need protection. Their involvement, the men, wasn't protection. It was manipulation. They tried to protect her because they had some version of love interest from her, which is how she uses her manipulation tactics. But we can see that time and time again through these relationships. And through the actions that they had taken after Joey had been stabbed. I know that the court listened attentively to all of the testimony, and there's so many things that, as I reflected for sentencing, to point out that are just so impactful from my standpoint, from my view, in terms of how she manipulated people, how she got what she wanted, how she tried to manipulate the court system, even in that phone call with her mom about what diagnoses they wanted to come up with Joey, and then how they should be able to communicate that back so that we're using that after we were already in the court process. There's so many things, but I know the court paid attention. I know the court listened attentively, and I don't want to rehash all of those hours and days of testimony. But those are just some of the highlights, and there's so many more. My concern is, in the days after the homicide, what is so indicative to me of her lack of remorse and her lack of accountability are those jail calls, the laughing and cackling about who doesn't stab their boyfriend. I don't see in what world any of that could possibly be funny. When she is having those sexual conversations with Greg Allen, when she is having those conversations with Jeff Hayes about John Pfeffer, about him, all of those conversations, there is no remorse. She supposedly just lost, in her version, to suicide. She just lost the love of her life, the person she was married, the person she had just set a wedding date with, the person she said she wanted to be a stepmom for. She had lost that love. And we saw those messages of how much Joey loved her. And within days, it's like it never happened. In days, she's moved on. In days, she's looking for who's going to help her out next. Greg Allen, Jeff Hayes, John Pfeffer. Who's going to help me? So when I'm looking at what the right sentence is, I'm looking for some glimmer that if the court grants her eligibility for release, that she's going to come back into this community and she's going to live a law-abiding life. But then I look at her behavior in court, and I looked at all the times that she would manipulate the emotion, in my opinion, and cry at certain times and not at all. And the way she responded and acted, her body language, I don't think there's any remorse there at all. There's no conversation in here, even if she wants to maintain her innocence, which that's the role she's taking. If she wants to maintain her innocence, there is absolutely nothing in this PSI about, oh my God, the love of my life, the guy I wanted to marry, he died. And I am so sad, and I am so devastated. If she wants to stick to her story, or one of them, that he fell in a life or he died by suicide, there should be tragedy in here. There should be heartbreak, like we heard from them, because that's the person that she wanted to choose to spend the rest of her life with. So if the court grants her release, she was 38 when she was taken into custody. Joey died in his 30s. So even if the court gave her her 30s or 40s, say she gets out when she's in her early 70s or her early 80s, what is it in here in the PSI that tells us that she's going to live a life free of crime and not hurt somebody else, not manipulate somebody else? How is she going to change her actions? And I looked for that. Because while I can completely appreciate the family's request for a life without release, it makes complete sense to me as a mom, a grandma, a sister. I get it. But my job's to do the right thing. My job's to serve the community, not just echo what they say. So when Attorney Grody and I sat down, we were talking through this, we're looking, what is it that's going to tell us that when she gets out, she's not going to manipulate another man? She's not going to look for somebody when she gets out of prison and has nothing, that somebody isn't going to help her out. She isn't going to be able to manipulate to get whatever it is that she needs. And at that time, she's going to be older. She's not going to have anything. But those people, if they do, will be what we consider by statute vulnerable adults. Greg Allen, he's a vulnerable adult. He made his choices, but he's categorized by that. But those people that she will likely have as her age group will be the people that she will want things from. Because from what I've seen, and the evidence that I have, she's always looking for people who are going to get her something. And so the cycle is going to continue. Someone else is going to be in a relationship with her very quickly after she's released. And she will prey on the men that she needs something from and who have something to offer her. And she'll take advantage of others and use them. When I look at this PSI, I don't see how we're going to change the cycle. I don't see how all of the efforts that have been taking place for the last 20 years, they haven't worked. A trip to Tachita for a period of time, a placement there, didn't work. Didn't change the course of the behavior. And so from a community protection standpoint, The only place that the community is protected from her is when she's in custody. And to me, that looks like a life sentence. Because she has done the ultimate crime that this state has by taking the life intentionally of another, and by her behavior, and by her actions after the fact that continuously show a character of a defendant who I don't know how you change that. To give her the empathy and the care to make different choices to not harm other people. So based upon that, I do think that in consideration of all of that, a life sentence is appropriate and that she shouldn't be released. And I'd ask the court to consider and follow that, as well as grant restitution, and any sentence related to this case should run consecutive to any other sentence because it's completely unrelated in my opinion. And I would ask the court to follow that as well. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Rock, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. In this case, we are asking for a parole eligibility date. I believe that the earliest that date could be is after 20 years, and we would make that request. We are further asking that the sentence in this case be run concurrent to the sentence she is currently serving as part of the revocation. While I do understand that they are two separate matters, I can advise the court that the reason why she was revoked was because of this case. There were no independent allegations that led to the revocation. We are at this time making a request for a restitution hearing, primarily because we just received that documentation yesterday and still need time to review all of the numbers. So at this point, we would ask for a hearing to be set in that matter. When we look at the Galleon factors, the first thing that we are to look at is the gravity of the offense. And I acknowledge that the gravity in this case cannot be understated. It is the most serious crime that exists in the state of Wisconsin. I don't want to reiterate a lot of the testimony or facts because that has already been stated here today, and the court has sat through the trial and had an opportunity to listen and observe to all of the testimony and the recordings on its own. The state has talked a lot about a lack of remorse coming from Ms. Krebs, and I simply do not think that that is true. When she's displayed emotion, they say that it's manipulated emotion. So quite frankly, I don't know what they expect a person in her situation to do. Ms. Krebs is incredibly remorseful. She did lose her fiance. There was nothing presented at any point to suggest she had any reason to wish him dead. She was in love with him and she wanted to marry him. Addiction was rampant within that home. It was something that both of the individuals struggled with, Samantha and Mr. Carnot. And while they did take different tracks throughout their addiction, I don't think that we can say that one person did better than the other. Addiction is no joke, and Ms. Krebs has struggled with it for many, many years now. It is true that her addiction started a little later in her life for what the court or the parties in court are somewhat accustomed to seeing. Oftentimes, unfortunately, we see young teenagers becoming addicted to substances and then that continuing for the rest of their lives. But as outlined in the PSI, Ms. Krebs' addiction didn't start until after her high school years, when she was introduced to substances via a family member, unfortunately. But she did struggle with it. And it's a shame that getting over addiction or past addiction isn't as easy as just saying, hey, here are all these resources, take them and get better. It's not that simple. And I think a big factor in whether the utilization of those resources is successful or not is somebody's like mental state and whether they are ready to take their addiction seriously and take their recovery seriously. And unfortunately, sometimes that takes a really traumatic and unfortunate incident for something in that individual's brain to just click and decide that it is time. And in my reading of the pre-sentence investigation report, Ms. Krebs made very genuine statements to the PSI writer with regard to her record, with regard to her struggles with addiction. And it's as if something has clicked for her now. She's made comments that she wishes she had taken things more seriously. And I think that change has really happened in her. And no matter what sentence the court puts forth down today, whether there's an eligibility for parole date or not, or whenever that date is, quite frankly, this period that Ms. Krebs is going to spend incarcerated is going to be her longest period of sobriety that she's ever had. And I think that's incredibly significant. But there was a lot going on in that house on the night of this incident and even leading up to it. Again, both parties were struggling with addiction. And I just want to point out that it wasn't Ms. Krebs manipulating the court system in any way or the parties in any way when she's talking about mental health issues that Mr. Carnot was struggling with. That wasn't something that was made up. There's documentation regarding that, medical documentation. And that was something that was being dealt with within the home as well. Talking again about there being no remorse, I just don't think that that's true. Ms. Krebs is remorseful. And while she does maintain her innocence in this case, I think importantly, she's respected the process. She's not had any types of inappropriate outbursts at any court proceeding. She's acted appropriately here today and throughout the trial proceedings. She was cooperative meeting with the PSI writer. While she didn't wish to speak about the facts and she relied on her testimony, she was forthcoming about all other information. While she didn't give a statement to law enforcement in this case and she left on the night of the incident, when she did have contact with them, she was always respectful. She was always polite. That is her true character. And when we look at her character, there is so much more to her than what has been portrayed by the state here today or even throughout the trial. She's a loving person. She's a sister. She's a daughter. She's a granddaughter. She's a mother. And that was something she struggled with as well. Unfortunately, again, it's not as easy as saying, hey, here's all these resources, do what you need with them so that you can maintain custody of your daughter. If it was that simple, we'd be living in a completely different world, but that's just not the way that things are. And that's something that Ms. Krebs lives with every single day. And I'm certain in my relationship that I've developed with her, knowing who she is as a person, that if she could go back and change things, she would. But again, unfortunately, sometimes it takes a very serious incident for somebody to be at that spot, to be in a position where they can say, okay, now I really do need to take this seriously, and these are the things that I need to do. And Ms. Krebs is there. She helps her family in their times of need. She helps the ones that she loves. I think that's demonstrated throughout this record. There was testimony about that, and there's evidence of that in the character letters that were submitted on her behalf. I think that's really also outlined in the PSI report itself. Again, Ms. Krebs, I think, was very forthcoming with her record. She didn't try to shy away from the struggles that she's dealt with. The state has indicated that she really has no employment history, but I don't think that's wholly accurate. While it's very limited and lacking in regards, she has maintained employment. A lot of that was disrupted by the periods of times that she did spend in custody. Although she does have that significant record, mostly it all involves around her drug offenses and her drug use. There's a very limited record of any type of significant violence. And again, it stems from this addiction. Looking again just very briefly at the remorse aspect of this, Attorney Tempelis has talked about how we've heard these jail calls of Ms. Krebs laughing while she's been in custody, and how if she was truly remorseful about having lost her fiance, we wouldn't hear things like that. But I don't think it's fair for any of us to say that there's only one way that a person can react to a situation like this. And when we couple that with the fact that she is in an environment, in a locked environment, in custody, trying to deal with everything that comes from that, just the power dynamics of all of the individuals involved in that system, I don't think we can say that because we hear 2 or 3 phone calls of her laughing or having any type of sexual conversation that she's not remorseful or that she's not sad that she lost her fiance. There were hundreds and hundreds of phone calls that were provided through the discovery materials, and there's multiple phone calls where Ms. Krebs is emotional and she's crying. Those weren't played and the court didn't have an opportunity to hear them personally or throughout the trial, but those exist. And we can't just ignore that and say, well, she's not remorseful because we hear her laughing occasionally. I don't think that's fair. Ms. Krebs has good character. She's a good person. And for us to just say that she should spend the rest of her life in prison without the opportunity of ever having a release date, I don't think that gets any of us anywhere. I understand the request, especially in a case like this, where again, the gravity of what occurred can't be understated. Nothing can change what happened. But Ms. Krebs isn't somebody that we should just be locking up and throwing away. Society should not forget her because there's so much to her. Even if the court were to grant her the eligibility date like the defense is requesting, it's important to acknowledge that that doesn't just mean she's getting out at that date. Parole is a process, and it's no guarantee. But I certainly think that it is something that should be afforded to her and that I'm asking the court to grant her. Ms. Krebs, in my opinion, is not some grand manipulator. She's a human being who has struggled with addiction for many, many years now. And she's a human being that I know can be successful when in the right mindset and when granted the right set of tools. For all of these reasons, Your Honor, for what is stated in the PSI, for what the court heard here today, for what is listed in the character letters that were submitted, we are asking the court to take all of this into consideration. We are asking for the parole eligibility date. We would be asking that this run concurrent to the revocation sentence that she is currently serving. And I do believe that Ms. Krebs has a statement prepared for you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to counsel on both sides for their statements, and we'll shift to Ms. Krebs. You can slide the microphone over in front of her. Samantha Jean Krebs, you get an opportunity to address the court. I know you've had past experiences at sentencing over the last roughly 20 years or so, but it's important for the judge to remind you that you have a voice here today. I'm interested in anything you want to tell me, whether it's about your background, any plans for your future, any remorse you want to express for your actions that bring you to sentencing today. I'm interested in hearing. Whatever you say, take your time. We're not in a hurry. I want to make sure I can hear you clearly. I want to make sure the court reporter can make an accurate record of your statement. So when you're ready, go ahead and project your voice into the microphone so everybody can hear you.
Thank you, Your Honor. You know, I never used to be able to understand people who talked about suicide. I couldn't wrap my head around the idea that anything would be so bad that anyone would take their own life. I've been close with several people now that have taken their own lives. They've suffered with mental health issues, but their methamphetamine use pushed them to carry out with these horrible acts. I had a friend who actually stuck his head out into a moving train and decapitated himself while he was high. Another man who did my tattoo on my arm, I learned about him losing his custody battle, and he locked himself inside his own home and he burnt it down. One of my best friends from grade school lost his younger brother while high. He took a knife and slit his own throat. My list goes on, but I don't think people truly understand what happens to people with mental health issues while using meth and how much of a growing epidemic it truly is. I love Joseph with all my heart, and we had just set a date to be married. And there's something so brutal about having found that kind of love and losing it. It's not like he left me for another woman where I could wallow in my own anger. Instead, I'm left empty, and there's no words that can describe the crumbling of my soul. I've had over a year and almost a half clean now. And looking back on that night with a clear mind, I asked myself, what would you have done differently? And these are those things. I would have called 911 immediately when he started talking delusional to me and he threw the knife sheath at me in the living room. 2, I would have never left his side. 3, I wouldn't have followed any of John's lies. 4, I would have been more help to the police officers on scene.
Number 5, I would have contacted his family sooner. Unfortunately, I made very different and very wrong decisions that someone would, caring for one of their loved ones. I was under the influence of very mood-altering substances. And while this is no excuse, it is what happened, and for those reasons, I should be held accountable. What I never will understand is the fact that anyone would believe, even for a second, that I would hurt Joey, causing the injury that would lead to his death. There's no way. There's no fucking way. Joey was put on a high dose of a drug called lamotrigine, which can cause suicidal ideations. And for him to drop off that, use a bunch of other substances, then meth, I know I'm not responsible for his death, and I stand by my oath that I took in this courtroom. While I am responsible for the wrong decision-making while high and in shock, I don't feel that I deserve life in prison for that. Thank you.
All right, we're going to take a second break in a few moments. Before we go off the record for that break, I'm going to have the deputy clerk hand a copy of the statute that the court may have to reference during its presentation. It's 302.114. So the record should reflect that council is probably aware of it, but just so there's a paper trail, the court provided a copy of section 302.114 to the defendant and her lawyer, and also to the state. On my clock, it's 11:32. We're going to come back into court at 11:45, and then we'll finish up. All right, we're in recess. Okay, we're back on the record in State of Wisconsin versus Samantha Krebs. It's Outagamie County Circuit Court, State of Wisconsin, file 24 CF 921. The appearances are the same. Ms. Krebs, at this point, the court's going to walk you through my analysis and ultimately my decision on the disposition. I want to stress to you up front, and hopefully that's indicative in my tone and demeanor, that I'm not deciding the disposition in this case based on anger or excessive emotion. Trying to do my job in a tempered, professional and reasonable way, considering all the factors and categories that the appellate courts and our Supreme Court tells me to follow. Up front, I'll explain to you some of the technical things that judges consider at sentencing. There's categories that by law judges are required to cover during sentencing, and some factors within those categories. Often they're referred to by case name. The attorneys have already referenced some of them, including the Gallion case, the McClary case. Overall, what those cases tell trial court judges, including me, is that we have discretion at sentencing. Some cases we don't have as much if there's mandatory requirements. However, even in this case, there's some discretion that falls on my lap. And what I may do here today may be different than a judge down the hall or a judge one county away or a judge on the other other corner of the state. And the appellate courts and our Supreme Court have said that's okay if we do things differently. We just need to make a record as to why. So during this process as we go forward, it's going to take some time because I want to be as thorough as possible. I'm going to explain to you the categories and factors that I've considered and ultimately where we land on a disposition. The main categories at sentencing include your background and rehabilitative needs. Second is the seriousness of the offense that you're convicted of. Third is the rights of the public, including any victim's interests, and we have multiple individuals that are victims in this case. Within those broad categories, I consider everything submitted to the court, including everything in the pre-sentence report, the letters that have been submitted on both sides, the statements here in court today, including from you. I also consider the attorney's arguments. I often spend a lot of time on sentencings, even in major cases, on my true interest and sincere interest in rehabilitation. As commented on, the system is, in most cases, set up to give people second chances. Sometimes it turns out to be third, fourth, fifth chances or more. But it's rare where a judge is presented with a case where they just say, well, we're just going to lock somebody up and throw away the key. That's something I'm not interested in. But each case kind of comes forward on its own merits or lack of merits and obviously all the factors that I'm required to consider. So I do acknowledge for the record that you continue, even at age 40, to have serious treatment needs. Some mental health, but overwhelmingly for the last 2 decades is addiction. And so this record that I'm creating is not going to be void of a discussion on addiction. And some of it has come up in the trial and some even here at sentencing on Joseph John Carnot and Joey Carnot and some of his addiction. But I'm not deciding the disposition in this case or whether there's going to be a parole eligibility date or not based on anything in Mr. Carnot's background that may be considered negative to any degree. He is the victim in this case, along with his family members. And while I am going to focus in part on treatment for you going forward, I want to acknowledge for the record that no matter what ups and downs Joey had in his life, his loss is a great loss for our community. That's acknowledging somebody who, I think for the most part, at least on paper and what came across as at trial, was somebody who was in his mid-30s, he was struggling. But often in his life, he persevered. He got over some hurdles. And although you've not been part of the community here in the Fox Valley for very long, I think Joey's story is common to a certain percentage of our community where you don't like hearing about the struggles and the family members don't like enduring the ups and downs, but there's always hope that he's going to turn the corner or she's going to turn the corner, whoever's in our community struggling. So if I read my paperwork correctly, he was born in October of 1988, was taken from us in July of 2004, so just short of his 37th birthday. So he's 36 years old. And those 36 years, probably most importantly, as came across from family today, the involvement of him being a dad was the most important. The court system often gets parents into court who are struggling, and part of the analysis for a judge is, you know, are they going to be back with their family? Are they going to have time with their child? And even though it wasn't my case, I know from what happened at trial and what was referenced that something important going on in Joey's life in July of 2024 was that he had a court date on July 31st, and you were aware of it. You referenced it, I think at least in one of the pages of the pre-sentence report, but I think it also came up at trial, that he was trying to get at least mentally prepared and organized for a court hearing on July 31st in Winnebago County regarding the scope of his time with his son. You expressed that you were supportive of that, and that's appreciated. In the end, what probably would have taken place was some sort of analysis by the family court commissioner or the judge in Winnebago County as to where Kaysen's dad was at with his addiction. And as his mom pointed out, and I think even Ms. Hippis at trial pointed out, there were ups and downs. Joseph's record of accomplishments should not be understated. His education, his work, his military service, his perseverance through tough times. In many ways, he represents a good percentage of maybe the kids we see from Kaukauna that come into the court system. They're usually from hardworking families, labor families. The community over there in Kaukauna is probably not too dissimilar from your community in Wisconsin Rapids. Good labor communities, people work hard, but on the flip side, they also play hard. And I think Joseph, or Joey, is pretty indicative to a segment of that community where hard worker, good family background, some rough edges. And if I use Kaukauna speak in a way, some people would probably refer to Joey over in Kaukauna, and this is said in a complimentary fashion. If you know people from Kaukauna, they'd probably refer to Joey as a good shit, because that's how they talk in Kaukauna. And that's not an insult to Joey, it's just that he's got some rough edges, and but in many ways lovable, even with the warts or the bumps and bruises. It's somebody you kind of go back to and you root for. Your upbringing and didn't have to be dissimilar from his. In fact, for the most part, when I look at your treatment needs, You know, you didn't have much through high school. If we're to believe everything you said in the pre-sentence, you had a decent education, you had decent family support in the Wisconsin Rapids area. There was some negative influences that cropped up, including from one of your siblings, but pretty much from 18 forward, not every month or every year, you're involved in the court system. And that's important for me to analyze when it comes to your treatment needs and you know, a decision regarding whether you're even eligible for parole. And I'll pause for a second to stress to the people, not just at the tables, but in court, that if the court decides on some parole eligibility date, it's not a guarantee that it happens that date. In fact, the paperwork I handed out under 302.114 just simply makes a person eligible. And then a parole board decides that, not the judge. So a person could get a parole eligibility date after 20 years, which is the minimum. That person may never get out. Some of it depends on behavior within the institution, and as pointed out in the statute handed out, there's things that reference the distinction between good time and bad time regarding behavior in court. But going back to where I was at on your path in life, somewhat in contrast to Joey's, there were different times where there were interventions to try and steer you to a different path. And I'm going to comment on some of your prior history, not to kick you while you're down or give you a hard time, but to document for the record what efforts were tried, at least over the last 20 years. Going back to some of your earlier cases in Wood County in Wisconsin Rapids. And it's not brought up to second guess a judge that somebody might say went too hard or too lenient on you. It's brought up to put context to your journey coming forward to July of 2024. And the prosecutor pointed out, the district attorney, Ms. Tempelis, pointed out at least a certain number of convictions. Her calculations may have included criminal traffic. At least when I calculated, maybe setting aside criminal traffic, there was at least 26 convictions. It's not brought up to embarrass you. It's not brought up to give you a hard time or second guess what the system did or did not do years ago. It's simply to bring up context. And I guess the overriding thing is to say, as you sit here at the table and as you're living in our community in July of 2024, you were not a naive person. You were 38 years old. You had a certain level of education that we expected at age 38 to have some wisdom. And that's not just in the classroom in Wood County or any classes you may have taken at technical college after high school. It's the collective wisdom of your life experiences, which includes not just traditional classroom setting, it includes the ups and downs of a childhood or teen years. It includes the school of hard knocks or life on the street, and your involvement in the court system, the ups and downs. And what that means to me and to most judges is the amount of collective involvement you have, that we expect some degree of wisdom from the educational experiences that are traditional and good, and even some of the negative things in your life that should have taught you some level of wisdom, some degree of maturity and wisdom where when you face a frustrating situation later in life, you can pause, you can react not by emotion, but some degree of reflection from the negatives and the positives in your life, and do something at first instinct that is more honorable. That maybe there's an instinct in you that's developed where you react in a positive way to a alarming situation. So that's part of the court's analysis going forward is, where was Samantha Jean Krebs in her life in mid-July of 2024 to the point where she could have paused and reacted in a way that we'd still have Joey here today and not even have this court case. And that's important because even as you're going to be incarcerated on any type of mandatory sentence or mandatory minimum, the court has to consider your treatment needs, because I think it's intertwined in the fact that under the statute that I provided, I have to make a decision on whether there's parole eligibility or not, and treatment's part of that. You need treatment, even if it's in a confined setting. You've got an addiction history that's in many ways jaw-dropping. It's not just head-scratching, it's not confusing, it's the fact that different efforts and different treatment programs have been tried and they're cited within the pre-sentence report. And even when you've had the alarming life experience of going to prison before, you get out and months later you gravitate back to the drug culture, to your circle of people that you can get drugs from with, or spend time with and use together, or even based on your history, there's times when you've had charges where it's possession with intent. The community you decided to move into, whether it was 2 years ago, 3 years ago, or roughly somewhere in the middle, my opinion is that this community is an empathetic community. People are in favor of second chances. I think there's times where Joey asks for second chances or third chances, and his family and friends and the court system at times had to decide that. So it's not a cold community, it's a welcoming community. And whether it's services within the court system that Ms. Tempelis talked about, treatment programs, or from private entities, charitable entities, we want to see people turn their life around. So you come to this community, and I don't know what your complete motivation was. Maybe it was a job, maybe it was Joey, maybe it was something else. And for the most part, it looks like you were welcomed in. There's good jobs here. There's a good educational system here. People are generally upbeat. They're enthusiastic about things such as sports, the Packers, the Brewers. There's countless community festivals. It's a place people want to be. That's probably why Joey stayed here. So that's you crossing the threshold into our community. And you, maybe it was to get away from Wisconsin Rapids and some of those influences that created the long record of 20-some plus convictions. And that's not something distasteful or motivated by a bad reason to come here, but once you get here, there's some expectation that you're gonna try and do better. And I don't think Joey was trying to discourage it. The messages Ms. Tempelis brought up suggested a positive vibe regarding his view of your relationship. So he's somebody who, at least the record we have here, wasn't somebody who was tormenting you. Maybe there's some times of frustration or agitation, but it wasn't something where you were in a domestic relationship that was tormenting. The cloud or the haze over the relationship was the addiction aspect of it. And as pointed out by Joey's family members, and I think that was consistent with the trial testimony, you know, he had gotten to a clearing or a time in his life where he was on the mend. He was in a good place. And there's nothing wrong with people jointly in recovery or in a sober environment or in the sober community relying on each other on their path going forward. So Joey's treatment efforts and recovery efforts were honorable. Your at least stated desires to get better on the face of your words are appropriate, but the issue is then what did you do to follow through with it? And that's where we run into trouble and ultimately where worlds collide and something bad really happened. I'm all for your treatment. I'm all for your recovery. I think a community as a whole was all for that. But at some point, judges, attorneys, people in the Department of Corrections, law enforcement, anybody in the recovery community has to say, well, how many more efforts are we going to make? And what has this person left in his or her wake? Where we just got to say enough is enough. So there's a balancing, and this is where we kind of transition from that first thing, your background and treatment needs, to the seriousness of this offense. It's a homicide. There's no sugarcoating it. It's an intentional homicide. And the definition of an intentional homicide, I know that was stated by one of the earlier witnesses today, has some broader aspects than one might think. It could be somebody who plans out a murder or a homicide and acts on it and follows it through premeditated, clearly intentional. Our jury instruction says, well, the thought of it only has to be a few moments or a few seconds before it takes place. Or it could be somebody who does something that's practically certain that death will result. So if you have you, who admittedly was using methamphetamine, have access to a dangerous item, a knife, and whether you had thought about it for a few minutes or you're just in anger or frustration, you plunge a knife into another human being and it results in his death. It's not a big surprise that the jury's going to find you guilty. That's a simplistic summary of what happened. There was a lot more to it, but that act itself, even if it was thought about for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, a minute, it doesn't have to be calculated and premeditated over a period of days. And somebody on the outside could say, well, these people were using drugs or the defendant was drugged up. Isn't that a mitigating situation? Maybe in some circumstances, but when you have a 20-year history of being immersed in the drug culture, at some point you know some of your use of drugs, whether it's meth and you've got some heroin in your background, amphetamines, THC, there's a collective knowledge from being in the drug culture that people do bad things when they're not always in their right state of mind because they put things in their body, such as meth or heroin or marijuana even. We've had homicide cases involving that. So Samantha Jean Krebs, at age 38 in July of 2024, was a person who, whether she had been cavalier about life or just didn't care, was making a priority getting meth and putting it in her system. Now, if you're living on your own in a house or an apartment and you don't go outside, maybe that doesn't hurt other people. It's a pathetic situation and anybody would wish you help if you were that person. But you chose to engage in a relationship where maybe the water in the fish tank that was referenced wasn't exactly Joey, but the waters were getting pretty clear for him. And when you get cross paths with Mr. Carnot, that fish tank didn't get cleaner. The water got dirtier. And that's not to say you put a gun to his head and told him to use drugs or to hang out with you when you were in a bad state of mind, but there was really an imposition of a theme or a will on your part to draw them into the culture you were so familiar with for basically 2 decades. Doesn't mean something violent had to happen, but in some ways your history is important to recount because, once again, I'm not resentencing you on an old case or criticizing anybody that was involved in the disposition on these cases years ago. You do have prior cases where you put people at danger, and some of them involved the use of a dangerous weapon. Even most recently, just the using of drugs and providing it to others is important because that just shows it's not just you immersed in your addiction, it's you willing to roll the dice and put others at risk. Your Wood County cases, even from in the last 3-4 years, 22 CF 543, possession with intent regarding methamphetamine. So that means you're not just using drugs for yourself, you're making it available to others. Wood County case 20 CF 217, possession with intent of heroin, which anybody that's around that drug with any degree of knowledge, not even somebody with, like you, with a honors degree from a high school, would know you put heroin in somebody's body or even in your own, and it's a flip of a coin whether you're going to live or die. Possession with intent of heroin in 2019. So at least 3 cases in the last 5-6 years where you're putting other people at risk. Now you got some cases a few years back where maybe not all domestic, but at least some confrontations with others where you did something physical. You got a disorderly and a bail jumping in 2011, a case in Wood County where you bit a male individual. You got a felony case in Wood County in 2011, which is 2011 CF 16. It got reduced down to a battery and a bail jumping, but and this is part of all the public record and referenced in the pre-sentence report. Even as early as 2011, you're charged with substantial battery because you have a confrontation in a driveway with a male individual and you crack him over the head with a bottle. He gets stitches, so it's charged as substantial battery, but the case gets pled down. So at least likely in a state of mind where whether you're drinking or using drugs, you engaged in violence towards another, a male individual, by cracking him over the head with a bottle. So it's not just you isolating yourself using drugs or alcohol or, feeling sorry for yourself, isolating yourself. You're engaging with others and things get violent. The DA referenced the Wood County case from 2016, 16 CF 490. It got pled down to a lower felony, injury by negligent use of a weapon, but the reality is from witness statements in the complaint and ultimately the original charge where there was least probable cause, you were charged with first-degree reckless injury from September of 2016 in Wisconsin Rapids, causing great bodily harm to an individual named Tyler with the last name L, with the letter L. So what's happening then? Sounds like you're both using. You're at a residence on Wisconsin Avenue in Wisconsin Rapids. He's playing with a gun. He's spinning it around in his finger, and he passes it to you. It's a Ruger revolver. According to the victim and other witnesses, Samantha takes the gun, firearm, aims it at Tyler's right thigh, presses it up against his thigh, and pulls the trigger, discharging a bullet into his leg. Now, when there's a follow-up interview, it's alleged that you asked him, is it loaded or not? And he didn't answer, but you still fired it. once again, I'm not reopening that case. I'm not criticizing the judge or the prosecutor who pled it down. But the point is, you've at least by 2016 had multiple events where you're doing some pretty crazy things that involve violence. So there was a reference whether something in somebody's life should be eye-opening or an awakening, or, you know, the light bulb goes off or there's a red flag saying, I need to do something different. Well, you already had chances to have that pivotal moment or seeing the light moment in 2011, 2016, and even when you get busted for the heroin offenses where somebody could have died, and you're already in your 30s, in the court's view, that's the time where you should have reflected and done something differently. Joey Carnot was not the first male individual, whether they used drugs with you or not, to get physically hurt or assaulted in some way by you. This was not the first time, July of 2024. So that at least steers an outside observer and to some degree this court to do a more serious analysis of, you know, is this person dangerous? How much time do they need to be kept out of the community? Are they going to change? You know, sometimes there's an expectation that people just get older or wiser or just get tired of committing crime and they stop. You know, can't always bank on that, but as the prosecutor was speculating, does that make somebody going to be less dangerous in their 70s or 80s? We don't have a crystal ball. But you and your track record, there were so many times where you had an opportunity to do something different. And I don't doubt that at times, and the lawyers know this, that there's sometimes a limitation on resources where people are on waiting lists to get into treatment, or there's not open spots in certain communities and a judge can order it and it doesn't always happen. So yeah, if I went through Samantha Krebs' history with a fine-tooth comb, are there times where the system let her down? Probably, no doubt. There's times probably where the system enabled you and probably should have done something different. But for the most part, the multiple probations you had, even going to prison and then being on supervision, there should have been some eye-opening moment of reflection where you say, I'm just getting too old for this, I'm tired of this, I don't want my life to be chaos. I don't want to have this maddening existence. I think Joey Carnot was to a point where he didn't want that maddening existence. So July's coming around, he's struggling, but he knows that Kaysen's mom is laying down a line where we're going to have a court hearing and this is going to get sorted out. So 13 days from the date forward of his death, he's supposed to be in court. And you referenced it, I think, in some of your trial testimony, and it's referenced at your notes in the pre-sentence report, that you were aware of that court hearing, and you were at least expressing a state of mind that you're going to get prepared for it. And as an outside observer or a family member for anybody on either side of that case, whether on Ms. Hippis's family side or Mr. Carnot's family side, what would you expect somebody to get prepared for that hearing? And your comment, and I'm paraphrasing, was that your preparation on, and knowing the importance of the hearing was you were going to buy a dress, or you did buy a dress. True? All right. And I think most judges or court commissioners appreciate if people come up into court in professional attire, or at least presentable attire. But with your history, the expectation, and I'm sure it would have been much more of a benefit to Mr. Carnot if you did have a hearing, maybe a note from a therapist or a doctor that said, Samantha's gone through some recent treatment, or partway through a recovery program. So the dress really wasn't going to mean much to a court commissioner or judge, but in your way of thinking, in July of 2024, that's what apparently was important to you. I'm going to get a dress. I'm going to make at least some impression on the surface of, hey, we're a good household, or I'm a good partner for Joey, and he should have time with Kaysen. There's a phrase that comes to the court's mind when thinking about that preparation for that July hearing, the family court hearing. It's the phrase, quote, window dressing, unquote. In the definition, and this is once again paraphrasing, window dressing, that phrase with the negative connotation, is referenced as something superficial, or, quote, actually misleading presentation of something designed to create a favorable impression, unquote. The jury trial testimony that Ms. Tempelis referenced, and for that matter, even your statements today, the question has to come up, is that something of substance, or is it window dressing? And as I sit here today, when you speak, and I guess reflecting back on your trial testimony, I repeatedly have in my mind, am I hearing something of substance, or is it just a dress? When she brings up suicide, you bring up suicide in your statements to here today. Is that something of substance, or is that your dress today, your presentation? This case was about what happened to Joey on July 18th of 2024, but a lot of it equally was what happened after the fact. And I know your lawyer has had this situation, and Mr. Aubert has had it over the years too, and the prosecutors have had it. I can't think of a case over the last 36 years of being involved in the court system where the behavior after the fact was so important and compelling to look at. The post-offense behavior, and we talked about the jury instruction 172, the after-the-fact behavior. Sometimes people flee, sometimes people hide evidence, sometimes they're deceptive. And we basically had, if I'm remembering correctly, the evening of July 18th, all the way to the point of apprehension at Veterans Village, where there was just an ongoing over and over analysis of whether there's substance or there's a dress. My words. And when I reference the dress, I'm referring to whether it's window dressing or deception. And what just overwhelmingly must have come over to the attention to the jury was, what does Samantha Krebs do on first instinct? Is it substance? Is it the truth? Or is it a dress? Is it window dressing? Is it deception? And over during the trial, through your lengthy testimony, and even just reference to things that you did, your acts, your words, your text messages, your social media, your voicemail message about Joey being at work, calls to others, statements to family members, the jail calls. It just came across that your first instinct is always deception. It's to mislead, it's to cover. And no doubt, that's likely what had a compelling influence on the jury. There wasn't any taking responsibility. Even if you had something in the heat of the moment that somebody might want to say, well, Judge, don't you think this might have been a reckless homicide versus an intentional homicide? That goes out the window in the first moments because you have somebody with a stab wound, supposedly your loved one, and even if it was gratuitously portrayed as an accident or a reckless or negligent mistake, in the heat of the moment, under the throes of an addiction, what does your instinct tell you to do? Well, when John and Ms. Cleveland got there, said, you're standing there, but you're not providing aid. We don't 100% know the timeline, but we know that it's at least minutes, maybe 5, 10 on the upward side. And the idea that Mr. Carnot has that wound is stunning. It's horrific to think about, but there's still a window of hope to save him. And what do? Well, you don't call 911. You call some friends, or they come over, and there's some discouraging of calling 911 or getting law enforcement involved. You're trying to collect items so you can get the heck out of there. And what really could have happened? Well, we know Mr. Carnot at least tried to get up, and Ms. Cleveland said he went on all fours, on his knees. He said, beyond his gasping and heavy breathing, he's saying, I need to stop the bleeding. And this is when she's there. So several minutes after the stabbing, he's still communicating. And what could have happened in the interim, even if you didn't have to physically, like, put him in a car and drive him to the hospital? Calling 911, they could have gotten EMT, fire department, somebody maybe even at the hospital. And we're all smarter after the fact, but the reality is, you letting him linger there and not helping him is probative of your state of mind and what you did. It's public record, but where you're at that address, just by Northland Avenue there, the apartment complex. If you do a search or a MapQuest, Appleton Medical Center is 1.4 miles away, 4 minutes by vehicle for somebody to come from the hospital. Appleton Fire Department number 4 is a half mile away. 1 minute drive time if you're following the speed limit. Somebody could have been there with professional skills to save Joey, but you didn't give them that opportunity. So when I talked about people having sympathy for people having addictions and doing self-destructed thing, I think that's obvious, that exists in our community. But when their behaviors over time put people at risk, put them in danger of serious physical harm or even death, that sympathy dissipates, or in many cases goes out the window. I don't need to go through all of it, but I agree with the prosecutor on highlighting just that timeline of deception afterwards. The magnitude of it, in many ways, probably for the jury, was overwhelming. You know, the suggestion to John Pfeffer that Joey fell on a knife, or even getting on the phone with Officer Fulmer, think that was replayed multiple times. It had to weigh on the jury to say, maybe not their words, but my words, is this substance or is this window dressing? Is this a dress? And you buying a dress or you selling a bill of goods may have been comfortable for you, may have been instinctual, an instinct that you're so used to over the years, may have felt right for you, but that wasn't reality. I cited to the definition of window dressing. The only other site I planned on referencing relates to a poem that I think overlaps with this case and your behavior after the fact. And it's more than 200 years ago. And what this famous poet wrote was, quote, "Oh, what a tangled web we weave, when first we practice to deceive." And for you, the first is always deception. It's window dressing. It's taking people down a phony path. And in many ways, and I'm not interested in insulting you, you're not really good at it. The phone call with Officer Felmer, the feigned alarm, the social media messages, the text messages, the voicemail message, just ad nauseum at some point. You live in deception, but in the end, you're really not that good at it. And so what do you create? Yeah, you created a tangled web. And the prosecutor walked you through that on cross-examination. And you stumbled, you bobbed, you weaved, you changed things. And then at some point, and I don't bring this up out of anger, but I bring it up more as a person that's been involved in the court system for 36 plus years. So as an attorney, as a defense attorney, as a prosecutor, as a judge now, and as a person who hopes for people to get better. But for you, just creating that overwhelming web of deceit. And as the prosecutor's taking you through even how you reacted to the stab wound and whether it was bleeding at some point, I reflect more as just either as a parent, a grandparent, somebody who knows people in recovery, knows people who struggle to keep their kids because of addiction. And at some point, I don't know if she said it out of exasperation, but that's how I felt it was expressed. I'll borrow Ms. Tempelis' words. At some point, she just said, "Oh, Samantha." And so I say that again today. Oh, Samantha. You had so many opportunities to change, to do something different. And you're the type of person that, judges that do treatment courts, like you had over in Wood County, and I do one here, root for. Sometimes when we're screening people for treatment courts, they say, this person isn't bad enough. We want the high-risk people. So the system hadn't given up on you in 2024. There's probably people on the outside that would have said, "Are you kidding? Why are you giving this person another chance?" But that's what we're designed to do, is trying to take people that are in their darkest moments and bring them back to some sanity. And you were cavalier about that. You go to prison, you're on probation at different times, you're getting revoked, people still coming, you got some incredible deals with some probably good lawyering over in Wood County. And did you take any of those opportunities to say, holy smokes, I really dodged a bullet, I really need to see the light and do something different? whether it would have been me or the judges in Wood County that you were in front of, people were still rooting for you 2-3 years ago. And you going back to that was just a ticking time bomb for something crazy to happen. So I'm not here to yell at you, give you a hard time. It's just, once again, I'm sure whether it's your mom or anybody else here that cares about you, it's just like, oh, Samantha. And that's a deflating thing to say, because the system rarely gives up on people, despite the calls from the outside to lock them up and throw away the key. So I need to weigh the interests of the community, and at some point, the empathy and sympathy have an endpoint. It dissipates. When you have a 20-year history, 26 crimes, convictions on my part, and as the DA, maybe 37 with traffic, at some point the system has said, enough is enough. This person needs to be put away for a long period of time, and if there's treatment needs, it needs to be done in the treatment setting or in the confined setting through the Department of Corrections. So I balance your continued need for treatment, but the overwhelming factor that I'm relying on is the protection of the public. And this should not happen again to anybody else. I give you credit for times where you have good effort on your education. You had sporadic jobs where you occasionally did well, so I put some weight on that under the Gallian factors. At times, you did okay on treatment, but as the prosecutor highlighted, most of your probation involved negative results. Today, you don't accept any responsibility. It's a suicide, Judge. I'm not buying that dress. So, by law, the court puts you on notice of, with a life sentence, any extended confinement can be impacted by bad time. So I've given you a copy of the statute, but you should know that regardless of what the court does today, there are penalties from the Department of Corrections regarding bad time. 10 days for the first offense, 20 days for the second offense, 40 days for the third and each subsequent offense. You'll get a written explanation of determinate life sentence. The court, as part of the disposition, will order the restitution as requested. We'll give Ms. Rock time to file a request. She made a verbal request for a hearing, but we'll give her 21 days to file a written request, and we'll schedule a specific one. But the court is accepting the restitution as part of the original judgment of conviction, document 417. So it's $2,962.81 to the victim's mother, CS. Crime victim compensation is $5,000. Total is $7,962.81. Restitution surcharge is $796.28 for a total restitution of $8,769.09. The attorneys can have 21 days to write a memo to the court if they think any of the credit applies. But it's the sentence of the court that you be imprisoned in the Wisconsin State prison system for a term of life imprisonment. The court, in its written explanation of determinate life sentence, is going to fill in a period of time where you can apply for parole eligibility. I've checked that box. You are eligible for release to extended supervision, eligible for a hearing. It's not an automatic granted. After serving 36 years, 0 months. Part of that decision on that amount is not just based on your violent history in the past, but also the seriousness of this crime, the aggravated nature of it. And in some symbolic way, 36 years is roughly where Joey was at. And it's the court's hope that over the next 36 years in the confined setting, you try and help others persevere. I think Joey was in favor of that. He tried to help others. It's clear from his words today to his sister that he was in favor of people, whether it was through religion or other means, doing better. And I think he would be hopeful that you, on your confinement time, try and better yourself and maybe some of the people you're with. So you are eligible for release to extended supervision, eligible for a hearing after 36 years, 0 months. That's consecutive to any other sentence. This is a separate and distinct crime. The court will give you a copy of that written explanation of determinate life sentence. There's also an explanation of the petitioning process for release to extended supervision once you're eligible. Court costs, including the DNA, are automatic, so we'll order that. That can be collected on extended supervision. At least at this point, since it's a consecutive sentence, it's the court's initial belief that credit doesn't apply. Is that correct, Ms. Tempelis? Ms. Rock? I'll give you 21 days to do a petition for credit. All right, anything else you need clarified for the record, Ms. Tempelis?
As it relates to the restitution hearing, if a restitution hearing is requested after all the documents have been reviewed, can it just indicate whether it's a request to challenge the amount, which would require testimony, or if it would be an ability to pay argument so that we can make sure we're
All right,
prepared?
and I'll give Ms. Rock 21 days to do that. Is that enough time?
Yes, that's fine.
Anything else the prosecutor needs to bring to the court's attention?
No, thank you.
Ms. Rock, anything you need clarified from the court?
No, thank you.
All right, and the court appreciates everybody in attendance. We were able to conduct this hearing without disruption. And once again, as the prosecutor said up front, I think she phrased it, there's no winners here. The court takes no joy in being involved in this process, but desire is tempered and reasonable justice, and that's why I went longer, to try and make a record of that as much as I could. So with that, we're in an adjournment, and the deputies can take Ms. Krebs back into custody. All right, Deputy Ryan Carpenter, can you address that, please? All right, the people in the back row should exit the courtroom, please. What's that? All right, we're off session, so the cameras by Supreme Court rules should be off.